So the real thing that defines trauma is that it still feels alive to us, even though it's done. And so if I'm thinking about a thing and it still brings up as if I'm already there feelings,
Mhm.
as if it's not old and over, but as if I can like re-immerse myself almost in the feelings of being
Mhm.
back in that moment, it has stored itself as trauma in my brain.
Mm. Welcome to Redesigning Health and Home. I'm Meg.
And I'm Carrie. We love creating beautiful, functional spaces and living healthy, vibrant lives. So join us as we chat about simple, practical ways to take care of your body, mind, and your home. Whether it's fitness tips, home decor ideas, or navigating those big life moments, we're here to share what works for us and what doesn't, with some encouragement along the way.
Let's redesign this life together, one step, one room, and one habit at a time.
Hello and welcome to Redesigning Health and Home. My name is Carrie, and I am so excited about the guest that we have today. Today is the very wonderful Lindsay Faas, and I do have to say, Lindsay might be my niece. So I might be a little bit biased about how fabulous she is, but she's going to share her experience with us today. Lindsay, welcome, and how are you?
Thanks so much for having me, Carrie. I'm great. I'm so excited that I get to have an excuse to spend time getting to hang out and chat with you. This is just like
Right.
fun anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And a little moment away from having to run kids everywhere and your business and
All the chaos. Yep.
all the things, all the things. Well, of course, I know your story, but most of our listeners won't know your story. So tell us a little bit about your educational background and how that led you to being a seasoned therapist and now a business owner.
All the fun things we do. So I have a master's degree in counseling psychology. I did my master's after an undergrad psychology and French minor degree because as we do. And really went into counseling because I have my own experiences of feeling kind of like forgotten or not fully seen or feeling always understood and really wanting for other people to not feel that feeling and wanting to be able to be someone who's present with people. And so that kind of initiated the journey. And then in my master's degree, actually for very different reasons, I did a lot of work around specializing in trauma specifically. And at the time, it was from this belief that it was like the hardest thing. So if I
Mhm.
could learn to do the hardest thing, everything else would feel easy. And then interestingly, I just really fell in love with it. It's pretty special work to be permitted into the spaces that people have the greatest amount of shame and secrets and hiding of themselves around. And so it went from this thing that I think was just like, I want to win at being at the best at the hardest trauma therapy thing to this is just the most magical work and I love it a lot. And so I've done a lot of investing in growing my ability to specialize in trauma specific work. So I work a lot with people with varying amounts of complex post traumatic stress disorder. I work with a lot of first responders and nursing. And then in the process of all of the other things about therapy that I do, I created a clinic where other counselors who specialize in diverse kinds of counseling rent from me and we market together. And so that's called Thrive Life Counseling and Wellness. That was born 7 days after my daughter. We opened our first office space and then we actually just recently grew into our new home that I hope will be our forever home because I never want to do this ever again. And it is a brand new build that we created that includes other kinds of holistic health pieces. So, massage therapy, naturopathic doctors, things like that. We have a yoga studio, which has been pretty fun to add into.
Wow. Well, I do really want to dig deeper into your new space because I have some specific questions for you there. But for those of us who may not be fully understanding what the meaning of trauma is, how it shows up in people's lives, and maybe even if we are someone or know someone who is affected by trauma, where would we even begin to seek out some kind of help?
That's a great question. Yeah. So, trauma actually isn't as like defined a thing as people might think it is. I often have
Mhm.
people who come into my office and go, I don't even know if I'm allowed to call this trauma, because it feels kind of like this term that means a very specific thing. A lot of people attach it to things like veterans, wartime witnessing of terrible, awful things. How we in psychology define it is really just as something that happened that was unexpected, and that evoked a sense of fear, helplessness, or horror. And
Mhm.
most of us can probably name like 10 different things that would fall into that category or more. And really, trauma is defined less by how other people define it and more by just how it lives in our bodies.
Mhm.
So, the real thing that defines trauma is that it still feels alive to us, even though it's done.
Mhm.
And so if I'm thinking about a thing and it still brings up as if I'm already there feelings,
Mhm.
as if it's not old and over, but as if I can like re-immerse myself almost in the feelings of being back
Mhm.
in that moment, it has stored itself as trauma in my brain.
Mhm.
And so that would be kind of the way that I would suggest that people consider defining it for themselves and kind of self assessing. Does that feel true for me? Is there a thing I can remember that when I remember it, I go like, it like knocks the wind out of me again and it
Right.
feels the same feelings as if I'm right back in it, almost to the same degree and extent as it did at the
Wow.
time, where it doesn't feel like there's distance.
Wow. Well, that's a very interesting perspective. I hadn't necessarily thought about the physical response that goes along with that. That makes a lot of sense to me. You know, I think the word trauma, as you
Mhm.
describe it, I mean, it's a big, scary term, right?
Yeah.
And medically, if somebody's experiencing physical trauma, that it's pretty severe.
Yeah.
So if you felt like you yourself had some level of trauma, and I'm sure there are varying degrees of levels of trauma, or you feel like a loved one might be there, what are sort of the first steps to even take? Because that seems like a big leap to go from, "Oh my gosh, this is where I am," to actually seeking out the help you
Yeah,
need.
totally. It can feel like a really big deal, and especially when it does feel kinda like, "Is that even what I'm allowed to call it?" It's hard to know,
Mhm.
like, who we go to, what we ask for. Maybe kind of like a side piece to this that's helpful is one of the ways that we define kind of the spectrum of trauma. So, within psychology, we talk about this idea of simple trauma and complex trauma, and there's quite a large spectrum in between. Simple traumas tend to be defined more by things that happen when we're older. So, like age of onset, when the bad thing happened,
Yeah.
impacts how we're able to make sense of it. If I have my grown up brain in place, I'm able to make sense of it a bit differently than if I have a child brain in place.
Mhm.
Whether it was a single incident or it's been multiple occurrences of a bad thing. So if
Mhm.
I'm a grown up who has like a car accident, that feels a little bit different than if I'm a kid who's had maybe like repeated exposure of abuse or bullying. Whether it's interpersonal or non interpersonal in nature also makes it different. So,
Mhm.
a car accident, again, is a really good example. No one was like trying to harm me, it was an accident. Or like a natural disaster is another good example. Nothing was trying to hurt me, it just
Mhm.
happened. That's a little
Mhm.
bit easier for our brains to make sense of
Mhm.
and allow for like that's probably not going to happen every day kind of a thing
Right.
versus, a person in my home has been seeking me out to cause abuse and harm and has been doing so repeatedly. Like as soon as we add up these different factors,
Yeah.
the level of complexity of the trauma tends to increase too.
Mhm.
And then interestingly, the one that I actually find the most meaning and hope in is that research also tells us that the degree to which someone feels like they are able to share about, be believed by, and feel supported by people in their life is one of
Uh-huh.
the most defining factors in what will differentiate someone who has trauma but doesn't have PTSD from
Mhm.
someone who has a trauma experience but does. And
Oh, wow.
so, while all of those other variables are things that make it more or less complex, the impact of other people and how they show up to support us is actually the most protective factor we have for mitigating the impact of trauma in our life.
Mhm.
So, if we are someone who's experienced trauma, it's about seeking out people that we think are safe people who can do a really good job at holding that for us. and being able to be like really strong believers of us and supporters of us.
Mhm.
And I think as someone who's maybe a loved one of someone who we suspect may
Mhm.
have trauma, we have to show up in a way that says, like, I totally believe you and I
Right.
honor what you've been through. And I'm prepared to step in and help facilitate going forward how we connect you to supports that feel meaningful.
Right. Right. Yeah, I two things that popped into my brain as you were talking about that. The first thing that popped into my brain is what a heavy load that is to carry for you
Mm,
as the counselor and the therapist. So how do you protect yourself? Like obviously you don't want to build a wall, but I'm listening to you, and as I'm listening to you, I'm borrowing some of your stress, imagining, you know, talking to people who are going through some really horrific life experiences. And
mhm.
how do you go home and whew, and or can you even? Is that even possible?
Totally. That's a great question. And the answer is kind of not always.
Hmm.
Um, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of my side projects is a podcast that I created for first responders. And one of
Hmm.
the things I talk about a lot in session with first responders, as well as in the podcast, is this idea that no one comes out unscathed.
Hmm.
And the reality of high exposure work, and mine isn't direct high exposure, but it's vicarious high exposure. And the risk factor for me in my career is called vicarious trauma. And a big part of that is that we you don't see the world the same way anymore. You just can't. Like, you know too much. It's kind of like how, if you meet a doctor, you notice that they use a lot more hand sanitizer than anyone else. And it's because once they've taken that like epidemiology class where they learn about all the different bugs in the world, like they just can't, right? They can't unknow it and they can never unknow that ever
Hmm.
again.
Yeah. Right.
And so there are things that are different that I do have to be conscientious of. One of the things that I think is protective of me is that I am married to someone who does nothing to do with what I do. And
Hmm.
he's really good at being a reminder of what is naive and normal. Like, I will
Right.
be like, "This is not safe. We are not safe. Our kids are not safe." And he's
Right.
like, "Lindsay, that's in your head because of what you do. Like, they are
Yeah.
fine. We are fine. They can go
Right.
do this thing. They are
Hmm.
probably not gonna die."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Right. Thank you for that reminder."
Yeah.
And then parts of it are, I think in anything, we kind of create a bit of a role, and that role protects us. And so,
Mm.
certainly when I'm in my work hat, like I'm authentically me, but I'm also in a it feels like contained somehow.
Mhm.
And I think that that's built in, I think, from our training to some extent, and then just lots and lots of experience teaches us some of that too. But recognizing that I did not cause your harm. I'm not
Right.
responsible for your harm. And all I can do is the best I can do to help you the best that I can. And
Mhm.
as long as I stay kind of anchored to that, it
Mhm.
makes the rest of it not as heavy
Yeah.
because it's not mine to carry.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of like the rock you need to put down inside your office and close the door when you go home, right? And you can pick the rock up again tomorrow, but you need to set it down for the time
Mhm,
being. When I'm thinking of you, as a mom as well, and
mhm,
I'm also a mom, um, I remember hearing somebody say that the parenting style that I grew up with was cheer on your kids and, just cheer them on because the world is tough enough as it is and they're going to, the school of hard knocks of life and all that
mhm.
thing. And then there's the criticism of, everybody gets a trophy and it's rah rah and you can do anything and that's not really true.
Yeah,
And so that's kind of some of the criticism of the type of parenting style that I actually used with my
mhm,
children was, to
yeah.
be supportive regardless. I'm wondering for you at your age, because you're significantly younger than I am, but also with your job, how has it affected you as a parent and how you parent your own kids?
That is timely. So I would say that my husband and I and to some extent informed by my job, but also I think just like who we are as people. We are both firstborns. I'm a firstborn of firstborns.
Hmm.
So I come by my firstborniness very legitimately.
My gosh, I had never thought of it that way, but you're right. I never thought of
I
it.
know,
You're right.
right?
Yeah.
Ryan and I are both pretty headstrong, determined people. And so I feel like determination was a word that came up a lot in feedback we received. And I think that that influences how we parent in a lot of ways. So we are big supporters of our kids, but we're also very honest with them about like, "Well, I don't think this is your gifting. I think if, right, like our son has very strong awareness that attention to detail, not his strength. But like, how can we help work on this? And what tools
Mhm.
do we need to help scaffold? And so we have a lot of conversations like that. And so I'd say like I think kind of come down the middle. I think that we have a very supportive home. I think our kids feel very cared about. I think they know that they are very loved. I think they also know that they're very lucky. I think that they hear a lot of things where they go like, "Oh, I'm grateful that that's not how our house is." And certainly, I'm also very honest with them about how my job impacts some of the things. And so
Mhm.
we actually had a conversation recently. My daughter was asking about a sleepover at a friend's house. And she's been told by this friend's family that they don't do sleepovers. And we have allowed her one sleepover so far, and it's with a family we've known for a very, very long time who live right
Right.
next door. But our family is also pretty careful about sleepovers, and that is
Mhm.
largely informed by my job. And so she's asking, she's 8 and she's asking questions like, well, how come I'm not allowed to sleep over? And how come other
Mhm.
kids are allowed sleepovers? And how come you
Mhm.
guys are so mean about this? And I am
Why
having
are
to
you trying to ruin my life?
right. And I am someone who I am not good at lying about things. That's never gone great for me. And so I try to keep it kid friendly, but I'm also gonna be pretty honest. And so
Right.
we've had conversations about like, mommy's experience is that sometimes there are not safe people in homes. And we
Uh-huh.
can't always know who the not safe people are.
Right.
And so mommy and daddy are just really careful about what homes we let you go to. And I think that this other family feels kind of similarly because of some of their experiences. And we're just all still learning about each other. And, these are kind of new friends to us. We're all still learning about how safe each other feels. And I think we're going to need to know each other for a much longer time before either of us feels
Mhm.
comfortable with this.
Mhm.
And it may not be ever, right? And we have to respect that that's okay too.
Right.
And so I think that there's different ways that it does show up. In how we parent, I think our kids know that there are things that mommy just says no to because, and they know that it has something to do with my work, but maybe not all the details of why.
Sure. Yeah. And I love that answer and that, any parents who feel the same as you do should very much feel comfortable in
Mhm.
just taking that responsibility, right? Because we can't pass it to our kids when they're little to make decisions like
Totally.
that. And so I I applaud you for that. I can imagine that for the kids, they're like, "Well, that's not fair." Well, life's not always fair. And also,
Totally.
parents parent differently, and that
Yeah.
is also okay, you know?
Well, and I think it's why I say, even when I kind of laid out the different factors that impact kind of the complexity of trauma, that idea that there's hope that lives and this idea of relationship being a mitigator to trauma. And so I remember having a friend who's also a trauma therapist, and we were pregnant at the same time with our first. So this friend and I had met up for lunch one day, and we're talking about, how are we ever going to let them do anything? Based on our experiences, the world just feels really unsafe. And I hadn't really thought about it before that. So the fact that she brought it up was like oh, I guess I have to think about that. And as we were chatting about it, the conversation was around, like we can't protect them from everything. So how do you do the best you can? What do you say yes and no to? And one of the things that I take a lot of hope in, and maybe I wrongly put too much stock in this, but how I was sharing a minute ago about this, the factors that go into how we define the complexity of PTSD and trauma. And I said, there's this one piece that I'm hopeful about around the relationships that we have being a
Mhm.
protective and mitigating factor. And so I think that I just invest really hard there. I pour in a lot of effort to making sure that my kids feel like they can say anything to me. If it's, terrible, like, I broke your favorite bowl or whatever, like I
Right.
try actually really intentionally to contain my response to that and
Right.
make it feel as safe as possible for them to share anything
Yeah.
so that if a bad thing happens,
Mhm.
because I can't protect every single moment, that
Right.
at minimum, I can know and trust that they're gonna tell me and
Mhm.
that they're gonna believe that I will believe them and that they are gonna feel like I can hold that well with them and walk
Mhm.
it out with them from there. And so while I may not be able to prevent every bad thing from happening, I feel really confident in the fact that our family is set up really well to caretake any bad thing that might happen.
Mhm.
Always obviously still trying to parent and mitigate that the best we
Yeah.
can as we can, but we just can't be part of every minute.
No, no. And you remind me of when our girls were getting to the teenage years, and they're off hanging out with friends, or even when they're starting to drive and going to parties. We always had you can call us any
Yeah.
hour of the night, no questions asked. You
Yeah.
need a ride because nobody can give you a ride, or you're not in good enough shape to get a ride.
Mhm.
No questions asked.
Yeah,
We'll come get you.
totally.
And we just kept reiterating that. And
Mhm.
I have always said to my girls, I want you to feel like you can tell me anything. And
Yeah.
that it
Yeah.
feels like kind of the biggest gift we can give them, I guess, or.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that that's that protective piece, right? Like, you created that for them, which is pretty cool.
And also you can blame it on your parents. Oh, I would really like to come to your sleepover, but my mom won't let me,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I'm happy to be the bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Feel free to use me as the bad guy for sure.
Totally. Mhm.
Um So, as I mentioned, you are in a different demographic than I am age-wise. So, you're probably coming at this from a different perspective than I am, but I'm curious about kind of issues that might come up for women in the midlife 50 plus.
Mhm.
In your experience, what sorts of issues are women coming to you about, and how do you help them navigate through that? I am not going to tell you my perspective because I want to hear it from you, and then maybe
Yeah.
we can discuss it a
So this is
little.
actually a demographic that I work with quite a bit.
Hmm.
And interestingly have for a really long time. I remember early in my career, I was like 25. And I remember having this woman who was 48, 49-ish. And I remember her coming into my office and looking at me like, this has got to be a joke, right? I think I was the same age as her kids.
Hmm.
And she was about the same age as she was actually a little older than my mom might have been at the time, and I had to name it because it was just so obviously palpably in the room, and so I said, "How is it for you that I'm the same age as your kids are?" And she
Right.
goes, "Well, I don't know what you're gonna offer me that you can possibly give me for advice, like, obviously, they're useless and so are you." And
Oh.
so I said this thing, where I said, "Well, that could be true. I guess we'll find out." The reality is it's me or you go back on a wait list for 3 months, and I don't know that that's probably better. So, what if we just have an experiment and you give me 3 sessions, and if in 3 sessions you still feel like I am worthless to you, I will happily advocate for them to bump you up the wait list and get you in with someone else as soon as possible. But if it's feeling like perhaps you're getting more from this than you expected, then we'll just keep going. And I saw her for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And she was lovely and we got along really, really well. And so I feel like I've been like learning pieces from women for a really long
Uh-huh.
time. I actually feel really excited to be 50 because I've been guaranteed by numerous people that I get to have a sense of liberation from caring about what anyone thinks. And I'm really excited for that. That sounds magical.
Yes. Yes. Your give a crap the filter starts to
Right? I feel
go.
like I'm getting tastes of it already. I'm turning
Yeah.
41 this year. I feel like there's like little bits, even since 40, that I'm just like, oh, I don't care what you think about me about this. Um, and
Yes.
that's refreshing. I'm enjoying it. And I can only imagine I've had a number of women in my life who are around 50 And I actually have some really close friends who are older than me who are one's turning 50 this year. And all of them have said the same thing. And I was like, it's like a magical day. Like, why was this not advertised sooner? Like, I don't
Right.
understand. It sounds wonderful. That's really cool. But I think that it clinically comes with some pieces that I witness quite a lot around like with this magical liberation from caring about what anyone thinks about anything. Um, it also means that the version of me I am in my world is quite different. And my experience of everyone else around me is quite different and changing.
Mhm,
A lot of my relationships are changing. So things like as my children are aging, the relationship I have with them is adapting because I'm no longer parenting them in the like classic young kid parenty way, but I'm still very much involved in their world.
mhm.
They're now finding people, and I don't always love who they're finding. And I'm supposed to welcome them in for Thanksgiving, and I don't always feel comfortable about that.
Yeah.
I don't love how they treat my person, or I don't love how my person treats their people. And that's
Mhm,
hard to like witness and feel like I'm still supposed to like guide and parent, but also step back because I want you to still choose to come home for Thanksgiving and don't want you to hate me. And so there's
right.
like a lot of dynamics that are changing and evolving in families at that stage
Mhm,
of life that are really challenging, varying degrees for different families, I think. I think there's also, actually, I heard you call this out, the sandwich generation piece in your conversation with Debbie, this piece about aging parents. And so, just as I'm adapting to being a parent of a child in a different way, I'm also adapting to being the child of a parent in a different way.
mhm,
Where up until now, I've maybe relied on my parent to be like childcare for my kids growing up and
mhm,
vacations together as family and these things where they were like adults in my life.
mhm,
And increasingly, as my parents age and they're starting to like decline, Alzheimer's, dementia, like all these different pieces, they are becoming increasingly childlike.
mhm.
And I am increasingly the grown up. And that
Right.
like role reversal piece that happens in that relationship is quite strange. There's
Mhm,
not a lot of great mapping for how we are supposed to do that well. And we're often doing both of those things simultaneously. So that's really hard too, that like all of our key core relationships feel kind of like quicksand. Like none of it's steady and predictable. It's all
right.
kind of like new and different and changing.
Mhm,
And I think with that, we're also doing this whole like changing of our own, right? Like we're doing this like perimenopause, menopausal thing. Our own
mhm.
bodies feel foreign to us. That's like a faulty design piece, I think, for women that like it almost feels like we never get a time where we get to just like know that this is how my body feels because it's
Right.
always going through some different of a version of
Right.
change.
Yes.
The minute we think we've nailed it, we're like, oh no, new stage. Sorry, you got
Right.
1 minute. Um,
Yes.
so that's a whole piece too, is like
Mhm.
our relationship with others, our relationship with ourself. And then
Yeah.
in that, you're supposed to like stay married and keep friendships. And
Yeah.
that's not always easy to do when we're adapting in so many fronts simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with every single one of those points. And I'm going to add some positive to this.
Mhm.
It is quite cool to be able to just on a weekend be like, hey, you want to pack up and go away for the weekend?
Mhm.
Sure. There's no, well, you know, this
There's
kid
soccer
has
at 8 a.m. and we gotta be at that thing at this
dance
time.
recital and this one is horse riding, which is what our
Mhm.
girls were into. Um, our biggest concern now is our dog,
Yep,
you know,
totally.
our third child. So there is some real freedom with that. And I think if you can embrace it and look at it that way as freedom to do what you want and not like,
Mhm.
oh, the kids are gone and they're doing their
Mhm.
own things and now I have nothing. And,
Yeah.
you know, because yeah, that's a sad place to be stuck in. And
Yeah.
I have seen, unfortunately, women that get stuck in that, just
Mhm.
their identity was completely tied up with their kids and they just don't know who they are now. And that makes
Totally.
me sad, because
Yeah.
it can be really awesome. There's some really great things about it.
Yeah.
So, Anyway,
Well,
that's the rainbow.
and I think that you kinda nailed it with this idea of, like, things that are protective to that are having other things that interest us. Like,
Yes. Mhm.
I talk about this with men a lot who are similar ages going in towards planning for retirement.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's fascinating about guys who retire is they go through this whole identity crisis of who am I without this job I've called myself?
Sure.
Because we like introduce ourselves as like, hey, I'm Bob, I'm a firefighter. And it's like the first thing you qualify yourself as.
Right.
One of the really fascinating things I talk with a lot of people about is how we like our language as people defines us to some extent. I've actually stopped using language with my kids that says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Because it actually like that. What do you want to be? Like to be.
Yeah, I already thought I was being a
Are you
person.
going to define that by your career? Like, I don't want to encourage that. And
Yeah.
I've asked that question since they were like 2. What you want to be when you grow up? A firefighter. Like, no. What do you want to do for work? How
Yeah.
would you like to earn a paycheck when you grow up? I will ask you those things. And then I'd
Yeah.
love for you to tell me about other things you hope to do too.
Yeah.
And even like those subtle transitions and how we think about it changes it. So
Yeah.
I think for women, one of the things that's hard is that often we do define ourselves by some of our caretaking role pieces. And that's
Mhm.
not bad. But if it's in isolation, it does make that transition time so much harder because
Yeah.
everything is new
Sure.
and nothing feels familiar and like it's firm ground.
Mhm.
And I think having a handful of things that we can go and, like, I can rely that I can still do this thing even though
Yeah.
they're gone,
Right.
allows us to at least have something that feels orienting in our day
Right.
to day.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I wanna switch a little bit over to your new space that you
Mhm.
just and, Lindsay knows that I geek out on all things home and architecture and that's kind of stuff, so you had shared some of your drawings when you were first, having
Mhm.
the build out done, and, in your new facility, you've really incorporated movement into the well-being of your clients. Meg, my co-host, is a fitness instructor and a personal trainer, and so, of course, she is very passionate about movement and how that can help us in our mental health. So I would love for you to tell us a little bit about how you have incorporated that within your business structure and offering that to your clients, and what kind of response you're getting from your clients now that you
Mhm.
offer that.
Yeah. So, a number of years ago, I attended a training at one of our local, it's called the Justice Institute of BC, and they do lots of training for different nursing and paramedics and things like that. And they had brought in a guest lecturer for a 3-day long training. And it just so happened to be my most favorite psychology geeky hero. His name is Bessel van der Kolk, and I think I cited him in my master's thesis like 576 times or something
Oh, wow.
ridiculous. I actually tried really hard to get him to be the second reader on my defense for my
Oh,
thesis
wow.
because I cited him more than any other human.
Mhm.
And so surely he should have, but he did not. So I got to meet him, and at this training, it was specifically around trauma. So he is like the preeminent researcher and clinician for trauma for all of the United States. He has written a number of books that guide most of how trauma therapists practice. And he was sharing at this training about some research that at the time was kind of like newly coming out. And it was around the use of yoga to support trauma processing. And he's like I think he's Dutch. He still has like quite a thick accent.
Mhm.
Like
Okay.
he's lovely, but he's like when he's talking about his thing, he's like no nonsense. Like if it doesn't work, he will tell you. He will tell you that's garbage.
Mhm.
And this man is like so yoga. Like this is the answer we've been waiting for. And he was talking about some of their early research findings at the time. And so I've followed his work for forever. And that research continued to happen and come out stronger and stronger research results around the impact of learning to be back in our bodies because part of what happens when something traumatic happens is we often feel a sense of detachment from our body
Hmm.
as part of our effort to survive that moment. And
Mhm.
whether survive that moment because it's actually like a survivable, like a physically staying alive kind of moment, or from like an emotional survivability perspective, like
Mhm.
this is too big and too much for me to stay fully present in. So we can
Mhm.
kind of check out. And so finding paths back to being in our bodies and finding safety and comfort there turns out has this huge degree of impact in how we can learn to be back with ourselves and find
Mhm.
safety again. And he also shared about some early research they were coming out with at the time around same idea, impact of salsa dancing. And I thought this was like the greatest ever. So I remember going back to the office that night and really the theme was this idea of like embodiment in our experience.
Mhm.
Um and embodiment really is just this idea of like being with myself, right? Like being
Mhm.
fully in myself as I engage in my world. And I remember I left the training. I went to the office. I had a client that night and we were discussing traumatic pieces that had happened for her. And I was watching her feet move and like just like in the chair, like seeming really unsettled
Mhm.
and fidgety. And I said, "What is it that your feet really want to do right now?" She goes, "They really just want to run."
Mhm.
And I said, like, "Does that feel familiar to what we're talking about?" And she goes, "It's what I really wish I could have done then, but I was trapped and I couldn't."
Mhm.
And I said, "Okay, what if try an experiment? What if we" at the time I was on this, like I was in this one-room office on the main floor of a building. It was evening, there's no one around. I said, "What if I open the door and you do like a lap? Like go run around the building once, come
Mhm.
on back." And so she did it. She comes back, she's like, "Oh my gosh, that's the greatest. That felt so good." Um, and we talked about like, I'd seen her for years prior to this. I never had tried anything like that before. The impact for her was substantive, and we continued to do work that connected to what does your body feel like it wants to do? What does it feel like it needs? What does it remember wishing it could have done instead in that moment?
Mhm.
And the impact of that was really, really significant for her. I started using that work in more things. And that was largely because of this research she shared about. And so at the time, I was imagining what I wanted my business to look like. And I had this idea that we would at some point incorporate a space that we could use for movement and that we would use it to do classes that would, whether it's yoga or dance or
Mhm.
something, just some kind of way that we can find our way back to our bodies
Mhm.
and have this resource. And awareness that I had referred lots of clients after this training to things like yoga because Bessel van der Kolk says yoga is great. Um, Only to find that they were coming back really struggling with, I went, but it was like all these really skinny stick girls who can put their leg behind their head and I can't do
Mhm.
that. And then they said a whole bunch of words and I didn't know what they were saying because I didn't learn, like whatever
Right.
this language,
Right.
like I don't know what's happening.
Mhm.
And that feeling of friction for them and
Mhm.
even just being able to start and the like heightened anxiety, like none of that is helpful
No.
to our trauma. And so our effort here has been in creating a space where we can have yoga happen without feeling like we need to learn a second language to do it or that we need to work out for months and months to be able to fit into pants that let us do it a certain kind of way.
Right.
Um, and that is really oriented towards a mental health focus as opposed to like a fitness bendy, I need to be a pretzel lady
Right,
focus.
a physical outcome. Yeah.
Right,
Mhm.
and so, like, physical outcome can be a piece, but it's not the priority, it's not kind of the
Right.
orientation to
Mhm.
begin from, and so, so far, it has been really cool to receive some of the stories we have. I'll admit your question about how's it being picked up, um, isn't where I wish I could say it was, but to some extent, that's actually my own fault that I just don't have the time to give it as much as I wish I could. But what's been really cool is that in the stories that have come out of it, it has been so meaningful for the people who have participated, and that's been really cool to get to be on the periphery of.
Yes, yes. Well, I happen to know a little side story about you that I'm gonna share. So, I was the kind of auntie that would come to the recitals. So, Lindsay was a huge dancer when she was younger, spent I don't know how many years in dance, a lot of years in dance.
Mhm.
And I understand that once you had your studio completed, that you actually went in there and allowed yourself to do a little creative dancing on your own.
I sure have. It's been pretty magical to have. I sometimes slip in on my lunch breaks.
I love that.
Yeah, it's been really lovely.
That's such a bonus to have your own,
It
like,
is a total bonus.
dance studio at your work.
I know.
I
I
love
know.
that.
It is pretty great. I've enjoyed it thoroughly.
Good.
Probably not as much as I expected I would by now, but I hope that there will be more time for it now that we're back to routines.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm sure your time to dance by yourself ebbs and flows for sure.
Mhm.
So Meg's piece is the fitness piece, and of course, as you know, I'm big home decor gal. So is your mom. She and I geek
Totally.
out on all that stuff. And so I'm wondering if you can speak a little bit about how a home environment might have some effect on mental health. So I'm
Yeah.
not talking about big fancy homes. I'm talking about really basic needs that we have for a home, but then also maybe a little bit about how what we put in our home can affect how we feel on the day to day.
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, I think to some extent people are impacted really differently by their homes. And I find that fascinating. I think from like a personal standpoint, I find it fascinating that people with very different ideas about how it feels to be in a home marry each other. I don't know if you've experienced this, but that seems to be my experience. So, I'm someone I feel really impacted by my space in finding that like the more organized and like limited distractions, limited stuff, places
Oh,
helps me feel mentally clearer. I feel
mhm.
lighter. I feel more able to do all the other things because I don't feel like there's so much noise in my surroundings. I married someone who loves so much noise. And like literally he's a musician and loves so much noise, but that actually like applies and translates to every part of
Yeah.
his world. He doesn't notice things like he will step over that pair of socks 1,001 times and not even notice that it exists there. But he really loves to be surrounded by stuff and to have it out and obvious to him. And we're learning that that has a little bit to do with some like ADHD stuff where like legitimately if it gets put away it ceases to exist.
Right. Yeah.
It's gone into a vortex and it does not live in the planet anymore.
Yeah.
Um but also there's a sense, I think, of, like, comfort
Mhm.
from having lots of pictures everywhere that
Mhm.
remind him of things that feel meaningful and connective. There's value for him in having, like, artwork from every place we've ever gone, but having one is, like, not enough. It needs to be, like, 5,
Mm.
right? Like, it's the abundance of it for him is part of what makes him feel, safe and connected to the things that feel
Hmm.
mattering. And I think that people have to I think one of the things that we take for granted is believing that there's, like, a right way of doing things, like, a
Mhm.
right way of having a home, and I think it's way more personal than that, and that part of
Mhm.
it for us is maybe exploring what is our version of ideal,
Mhm.
and then finding how we find that in actual life because we marry each other, and then that's really hard for either person to win. I really value the fact that I have an office because it stays clean. No one touches it, and I love that, and so that's been one of the ways that I support my own mental wellness is that my home is actually not the place where I feel that sense of clarity, it's here that I feel that.
Mhm.
Um, that said, I did make a rule when we had kids that mommy gets to have 1 space, and it's not even, like, a defined space, like, it doesn't even have its own walls. I claimed a corner of my living room that's near a window, and I put an armchair and a lamp and a table. And the rule is that no one else's stuff is allowed to be on my table, and no one else is allowed to sit on my chair. And for as long as those 2 spaces are clear and I can sit there and I can do whatever I want whenever I want in that tiny little corner, I have an easier time kind of ignoring the rest
Mhm.
because it's like my sanctuary space that I
Yeah.
can come back to. And so the chaos will still be the chaos, but I can at least have that little carve out.
That is so interesting that you said that because on one of our previous episodes, Meg and I talked about that and how, like, not everyone lives in a home environment where there is a room of their own. Like, that just
Mhm.
doesn't exist. I grew up sharing a room with my
Yep.
sisters, and we kinda got to the point where I said, "Even if all you can carve out is a chair that you can hide under the stairs or in a closet or in a corner and
Mhm.
claim that as your own so that you know the next time you come back, your favorite pen in your book
Uh-huh.
or your
We'll be in the
journal is
same
gonna
place.
be there, and it's not gonna be cluttered with like, I
Yeah.
feel like that is so important.
Yeah.
Just a tiny space to be your own where you could just, you know?
I remember getting my yellow chair when Everly was, like, 1.5, maybe 2,
Mhm.
and I was probably on the verge of a mental breakdown, honestly, because I had 2 small children, I was running a business, and I was a crazy person, and, like, a week after we bought this chair, like an IKEA armchair, it's not
Mhm.
fancy, but it's bright yellow and it makes me happy.
Yes.
Um, like, a week after we buy this chair, I get a call from Ryan. "I am so sorry." And I was like, "What happened?" He goes, "Evie found markers and your chair and decided you really needed some art on your chair." And I was like, "I had one rule.
Oh,
No one
no.
touches the chair. It's mommy's chair." And he was like, "I know. I'm buying a steam cleaner on Amazon as we speak. I will do my best to have it cleaned within the next 3 days because I recognize you're hanging on by a thread and you needed this." It's like,
And
"Thank you for knowing."
was he able to get it clean?
Mostly. It's
Oh,
the yellow on that one spot is still tinged like a tiny bit greener than anywhere else, but it's fine.
oh my
It was
god.
okay.
It's funny, my favorite coffee mug is yellow on the inside. And, like,
Yeah.
if it's in the cabinet, I will always grab the yellow mug.
Yes.
If it's not, I'll look for the red or the orange, the blue. I
Yeah.
can't drink out of green. I don't know
There's
why.
something about yellow. Like, I don't want it everywhere. I don't want it all the
No.
time,
Mhm.
but I love it in bits.
Yeah, it's like sunshine, right?
It's
Like
like
sun.
sunshine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, my next question is, how important are the relationships we have both in childhood and in adulthood in shaping who we are and how we experience the world? So that seems very serious compared to where we just left off with the yellow chair.
I mean, I think that if I were to pick one thing that I think most defines human existence, it would be relationships.
Uh-huh.
We can't live without them. We're not in a vacuum. And how we invest in those relationships is, I think, the whole point of all of it. And it's why I think my job's pretty cool because I literally get to do that all day long, which is pretty awesome.
Mhm.
I'm actually going to share this story. So we had this thing come up on the weekend. A friend of my daughter's, who's 8, her mom reached out to a group of us moms, letting us know that they've recently found out that their daughter is diagnosed with ADHD and autism. That was new information, although like not particularly shocking information, but they did a really good job sharing about it and had offered a letter that mom and daughter co-wrote together,
Mm.
helping her friends to understand about her and how her brain gets stuck on certain things
Mhm.
and whatever. They did such a good job of it. And so she had sent this to all of us moms and said, "Would you mind sharing this with your girls and having conversations about how it looks to be a good friend to my daughter, but also how they get to expect my daughter to be a good friend to them."
Right.
And I know it won't always go smooth, but
Right.
it would be great if we can like find a way through this together. And we have a very cool community of people that I adore. And all of these moms were very lovely and supportive. And so my daughter and I had this conversation yesterday about heads up, your friend has said. And
Uh-huh.
we read the letter together. She goes, "That was very long." And it was, but it was also, we like, she had some really good questions. And well, but like, what if I still get mad at her sometimes? Am I not allowed to get mad at her because she has autism now?
Right,
So we
right.
had some really interesting conversations about, like what it means to still be impacted by the behavior of others, but also to hold caring for them at the same time. Anyway, I got a message from the mom actually just probably an hour before we hopped on together saying that she went to the school to pick up one of her other kids and saw the girls out at recess and they all came running over with big smiles on their faces. They've had a hard time playing together at recess because of some of the like idiosyncrasies of navigating who gets to pick the play and how we do that. And some people are a bit
Mhm,
more rigid and
mhm.
whatever. And all of them are talking about the letter and how they're like so excited to be friends and to invest in
Oh,
this. And I thought that was a really like, if 8-year-olds can figure this out, we
right?
should really be figuring this out.
We
Like, how do we
should.
just care well for each other? How do
Yeah.
we try to share vulnerably and
Mhm,
sensitively about ourselves? How do we hold space for that well when it's shared with us? How do we
mhm.
try to hold understanding and compassion for each other in our stories?
Yeah.
And I think that to some extent, it relates to all of the things that we've talked about together today. Like when
Mhm,
I feel really genuinely cared about, I choose better things for my own body. When I feel really, truly, genuinely cared about, I choose different things in my home,
mhm,
right? When I feel really, truly cared about, I feel different in my brain,
mhm,
right? Like how we experience ourselves and the world around us feels different.
mhm.
And so it's kind of like the meat and potatoes of everything.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think we can even offer that to total strangers just with a smile or a "How are you today?" You know? It's
Totally.
small. It's small, but it's something, that we can
Yeah.
offer for sure.
Yeah.
Work-life balance. Is that even real?
No,
Y
it's not real.
Thank you. Thank you. Say more words about that.
I remember years ago, I was on a panel at a professional meeting thing for therapists, and the person running it asked all three of us panelists about work life balance. And I was like, I think I maybe had one kid at the time and hadn't grown my business yet, and was like, yeah, work life balance. And then we got like 2 panelists down. Her name's Janelle. We've known each other for a long time, and she was further along in her parenting journey than I was, and she was teaching at a university while also having a clinical practice and whatever. And she goes, "I think it's bogus and doesn't exist." And I was like, "Dude, you just, like, threw me down the river, man." Like, I just went on and on about, like, work-life balance, and then you're like, "Nope, not a thing." That felt crummy. But I think she's right now that I have more perspective.
Yeah.
Like, it's kinda bogus. I
I
don't know if there is such a thing. I don't know that we ever have it for long.
I agree. I was just talking to Meg, actually that talking to
Mhm.
her about you coming onto the show and saying, it sounds like there's this little nice little scale and we're always keeping it even. I'm sorry. When I was a parent, the scale had so many different sides. And,
Mhm.
if the kids were sick, the scale came up here. And,
Yeah.
and if that happened, then my workout scale went way down here. Like it,
Yes.
as women, and I am generalizing here,
Yep. I think
as
you get to.
parents, sometimes you feel like you're putting out the fires and you're putting out
Yep.
the biggest fires first.
Mhm.
And can we just say that that's okay? Like, I get it. Like, yeah, I would love to go to the spa every Saturday and
Mhm.
meditate every morning and all the things, but it's, I just don't think that's realistic.
Yeah. I think I think that when we buy into the myth that says we're supposed to find a balance, that that's, like, achievable,
Hmm.
we then just always feel like we're failing because the universe doesn't stop, right?
Right.
So, like, when people ask me how I am, I'll be like, life's just, like, really lifey right now.
I
It's
like
just,
that term.
like, doling out some extra. And I remember, like, spring last year was just, like, the most volume of stuff that I have ever had to tolerate simultaneously. And I remember at one point laughing because it seemed so ridiculous that the universe was like, "You know what? That wasn't enough. You get
Yeah.
one more." It's
Yeah.
like,
You thought you were done?
"Pardon?" Actually, I think that was Papa's funeral was the thing that made me go be like, excuse me. This
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, but no."
I know.
Because at that stage, we were under construction here. Navigating construction here had already been challenging for a bunch of reasons, but among them was that my husband had been dealing with his concussion. And so his ability to like be a sidekick during that time and really be like a useful sounding board was limited because he couldn't track all the information. And so I would have to like repeat conversations 10 times to talk
mm,
about the new thing because you needed that backstory to do the next thing. But he didn't remember the backstory, even though we
mm,
talked about it a number of times. So it just
right.
was not, it was more on me than I expected
Mhm.
it to be
Right.
when we bit that off. And our kids are, of course, like going to school. They are 10 and 7 at this
Mhm.
stage. Um, we had had a number of pieces related to my husband's concussion where he's still like in treatment full time. He's not working. He's whatever about that. And then on his birthday, I call home at lunch to say, "Hey, I missed you this morning. You were still sleeping when I left. Happy birthday." And he says, "I'll have to call you back later. They're showing up with the fans because our house flooded." And so we had to go from living in our house and at least just having things at the office be crazy to all 3 floors of our home were impacted by our flood. Our washing machine that's on the top floor where our bedrooms are, so convenient until this happened, had overflowed. It ran down a joist that holds up the whole house and had impacted our main floor flooring and then our ceiling in our basement. And so we had to move out for a number of weeks. At the same time that BC's regulation around Airbnbs had changed. So it went from having like 55 options at the end of April to when we were moving out on May 4th, having 3. And 2 of them were so far away that the drive to and from school and our kids' activities. So we ended up in this one specific one. It was fine, but it was not ideal.
Mhm.
2-bedroom suite, kids are sharing a bed. So we're not having to like move out. All of our stuff is packed up and put into some storage somewhere. Since we were already going to be doing a whole bunch of work on the main floor, we decided at the same time to renovate our kitchen because when else you might as well. They're going to
Right.
pull everything out anyway. And so we took that on. And then I think it was, like, maybe a handful of weeks after all of that was kind of happening
Uh-huh.
that we got the call about Papa,
Uh-huh.
and was okay.
Yeah.
I thought we kinda maxed us out, but okay,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
sure, we're gonna hop on a plane, and I don't know if you remember,
Mhm.
but I remember being there for the funeral, and Ryan is sending pictures of him taking out our cabinets and having them in a pile in the backyard because we were supposed to do that weekend, and I was supposed to be there to help, and instead I'm in
Yeah.
Manitoba. So just, like, the world does not operate in ways that are
Mm-mm.
clean and tidy,
No.
and I
No.
think that particularly I'm gonna say as women, but also as, like, high functioning women, like, as women who take on a lot, as women who say yes to things, as women who
Mhm.
don't choose to live small and just kind of create this little nook in their world that they just kind of
Mhm.
exist in. I recognize that one of my tendencies is I look at my resources and I go, "Yep," and I max it out, and I fail to account for the fact that the universe is also gonna show up and make my car break down or my roof need replacing
Right.
or my house flood or
Yeah.
and so I don't leave the, like, bandwidth for that,
Mhm. Right.
and so I've already capped out,
Mhm.
and then I get hit with things, I'm like, "What?"
Right. Right. That was not factored in to the
I did
day.
not plan for that. How come I haven't learned my lesson yet, right? And so I think it's really hard to strike it because the minute you think you have it, the universe comes around again and kind of goes like, "Nice, you thought you had that. That's funny."
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. I like the
yeah,
term that you used. Life was just kept up
life is lifey.
like the math is ain't mathin'.
Math ain't
Life
mathin'.
life
Totally,
life is kind of
totally.
life is kind of lifey right now.
Yep.
That's a good one. Well, I do not want to let you go without talking about behind the line. And I really want you to share beating the breaking point and behind the line. So tell us about that, how you came up with it. Was it around COVID?
It was actually before COVID,
Oh, okay.
shockingly. So a year and a half or so before COVID, I had a day where I had had 4 first responders of different types,
Uh-huh.
firefighter, corrections, RCMP, and nurse, all in my office in the same day for a first session.
Wow.
And so similar stories of what was hard. One of the things that's fascinating about working with first responders is when I got into it, I assumed that the thing I would be talking with them about were the calls.
Mm.
And interestingly, that's actually almost never what we talk about.
Oh.
More often than not, it's actually like organizational level stress and trauma
Mm.
because those systems that surround those kinds of public service jobs are so terrible,
Mm.
um, and don't support them particularly well.
Mm.
So it's actually less about the calls themselves and more about how they are held by their management and
Mm.
supervisory staff and the systems that are supposed to help keep them doing what they do. And so all 4 of these people, different walks of life, different genders, different ages, different amounts of time in the job, all say words. And I feel like I'm living Groundhog Day because I find myself hearing the same themes, even if it's coming out a little bit differently. And I find myself saying the same words repeatedly. So I'm like,
Mm.
so this is how your brain works. This is what happens with trauma. This is da 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 da. And it almost feels like a spiel as opposed to like authentic
Mm.
therapeutic
Right.
interaction. And I left and went home that day, and I was so mad. I was so mad that the world does this to these people who are amazing. Like, they're amazing, and they're really genuinely just trying to give well to their communities. They're
Mhm.
genuinely good-hearted contributors, public-minded servanthood people,
Uh-huh.
and they just wanna do it well and are hit with all of these barriers and friction points that make no sense and that end up pushing out really amazing people. Like, these are the people that I would want responding if it was my kid.
Sure.
And they're going to end up being not in this job anymore, not because they didn't want to, not because they weren't great at it, but just because they got so burnt by
Mm.
it
Uh-huh.
that they can't. And that is going to end up leaving us with a bunch of people who are like brand new and don't know what they're doing, which is kind of half of what happened in COVID.
Uh-huh.
And that gets scary really, really quickly. And so I remember going home feeling really, really angry and telling my husband, I hated today. I hated hearing myself say the same thing like it was a script. And
Uh-huh.
he said, "Well, why don't you just make it a script? Like, why don't you build something that just is like the primer, and is like the early information, and maybe you can like get ahead of it. Maybe you can catch people before it's there, and then they
Mhm.
can come to you for the actual therapeutic part instead of this kind of educational piece." And so beating the breaking point actually happened first. I had started this course and marketed it to first responders. It's used by a number of first responder groups in our community. There's like Badge of Life here in Canada it promotes it to some of their users. We have a number of RCMP groups. Langley City Fire Department uses it. And so it's just a program that people can walk through at their own pace. It's all virtual, comes with a workbook. It has pieces that just help educate around the different kind of risk points for first responders and frontline helpers
Uh-huh.
and ways that we can help mitigate that early on. It's effortfully trying to be preventative. And so helping people to build out a plan so that they can be mindful of some of their risk factors and interacting with that earlier.
Uh-huh.
And then after doing the course for a while, I had a friend who said, we should make podcasts. She also had a course. She works around family related parenting stuff. And so she's like, I think I'm going to start a podcast. You should start one too. We could do this together. And so we did separate podcasts at the same time, and we've been on each other's, and that was quite fun. But that's how Behind the Lines started. And it was really just this effort at like being more accessible, right? Like, I think
Sure.
the thing that's hard about a course is you have to like A, choose it, B, pay for it, and like choose to invest the time and effort in it.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a podcast just feels like this passive access point that we can listen to in the car and at the gym and
Right.
wherever. And so that was really wonderful. I haven't made a new episode in a couple of years because of the new office. And
Uh-huh.
so it lives out there in every, internet land. And I love that I actually still get emails from people regularly who are like, "Hey, I'm a new listener, and I just wanted to let you know I really love this episode."
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I do hope to get back to it sometime. I don't think it's going to be for a little while still until we feel a bit more stable here, but it's been a very cool gift.
Awesome. I am going to let you choose from 2 questions to wrap up today.
Ooh, okay.
So here are the 2 options. Meg and I like to ask our guests what they're redesigning in their life right now. That's one option.
Okay.
The second option, because you are so many things, counselor, daughter, mom, business owner, wife, all the
Mhm.
things, what do you think the point of this life is anyway?
I actually ask clients a lot what they think the purpose of life is.
Mm.
I find it's a really meaningful question in session because often we have quiet expectations we're not saying out loud. And it's often when we look at but what actually really does matter
Uh-huh.
that we start reconciling to am I living like that? Or am I getting really twisted up about things that if I look at it, I actually don't even really care that much about?
Right.
And am I not twisted up about maybe more of the things I should be? And I find it fascinating listening to people's answers because I'm very clear on what mine is.
Mm.
And I think it's been mine since I chose counseling at 15 years old that the whole point of this is to leave it better than we found it. And I think we do that relationally. I think we do it by investing in people. And so that's what I do in my job and in my home and in my community is just try to love on people and care well about them and make them feel like they are, the brightest star whenever I get to see them
Uh-huh.
because I think that that helps us feel mattering. And I think that that's when we are our best selves and then our world is better.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. I 100% agree. It's all about the people. It's all about the love that you have in your life. Nobody on their deathbed says, "Oh, gee, I really wish I could have worked more hours,"
Totally.
or that I had an extra car. That's
Hmm.
never what matters at the end. So I love that
Totally.
answer. I love that
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
So I am incredibly grateful for you spending over an hour with me today. But I do want to give you the last couple of minutes to tell our audience where can they find you? Where can they connect
Mhm.
with you? Where can they find these wonderful resources that you've created?
Yeah. So everything is very easily Googleable. So our clinic is Thrive Life Counseling and Wellness. Our website is easy to find. You can just Google it. We're located in Langley, BC, Canada. Our online resources, my online resources are also really easily searchable. So Behind the Line can be found on any major podcast platform. We also have it on our website and links to every episode there. Beating the Breaking Point can be found on our website as well as on its own kind of course landing page kind of place as well. And so easy to find. And most of those things are also very easy to find if you Google my name.
Yes. Well, Lindsay, we will include the links and all that information in the show notes for our listeners today. But I do want to just say thank you so, so much for spending this time with me. You're a delight. I found our conversation to be very meaningful, and thank you so much.
Thanks.
The topics discussed on redesigning health and home are for entertainment purposes only. We are not physicians and we are not counselors. So please just enjoy this as it's intended to be, which is for entertainment purposes only.
Thanks for listening to the Redesigning Health and Home podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, we would love for you to like, share, and follow along so you can catch us on all future episodes. You can find me, Meg, at Fit, Fed, Feeling Good on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And you can find me, Carrie, on my website at homestylewithcarrie.com and on Instagram and Facebook at Homestyle with Carrie. That's Kerri. And you can find both of us at Redesigning Health and Home on Instagram and Facebook. So join us next time for more inspiration on creating a home and a lifestyle that truly supports your best self.